Assalomu alaykum, hurmatli ishtirokchilar, hurmatli do'stlar, hurmatli yoshlar, hurmatli hamkasblar, do'stlar. Barchangizga yana bir bor assalomu alaykum. Xayrli kun, barchamizga juma muborak bo'lsin. Bugun 16-oktyabr juma kuni, ya'ni bugun ish haftasi yakunlanmoqda, lekin shunga qaramasdan biz barchamiz mana shu bugun ajoyib bir kunda ko'chada juda bir ajoyib havo bo'lmoqda, yoqimli juda, va o'ylaymanki bugungi biz uchrashuvimiz ham mana shu juma kuni bo'lishi va mana shu biz bugun juda bir muhim mavzu haqida gap yuritamiz. Bu bevosita 17-oktyabr, ya'ni ertaga butun dunyo bo'ylab nishonlanadigan xalqaro qashshoqlikni qarshi kurashish kuni arafasida o'tmoqda. Bu sana 1992-yildan boshlab BMTning Bosh Assambleyasining tavsiyasiga ko'ra nishonlanib kelmoqda va bu kunning asosiy maqsadi dunyo hamjamiyatini va shuningdek turli xil mamlakatlardagi siyosatchilar, ijtimoiy soha vakillari, jurnalistlar, oddiy fuqarolar, yoshlarni mana shu qashshoqlikka va kambag'allikka barham berishga qaratilgan. Mana shu kunda dunyoning turli xil burchaklarida, dunyoning turli xil bir auditoriya platformalarida turli xil tadbirlar, anjumanlar, debatlar, fikr almashuvlari, muloqotlar, dialoglar bo'lib o'tmoqda. Mana shu dunyo hamjamiyati tomonidan nishonlangan ushbu kunga biz bugun mana shu tadbirimizni ham nishonlamoqdamiz. Bu tadbirimiz bevosita Birlashgan Millatlar Tashkilotining taraqqiyot dasturi, Jahon bankining O'zbekistondagi vakolatxonasi hamda yoshlar ishlari bo'yicha agentligi tomonidan tashkil etilmoqda. Mening ismim Anvar Beliboyev, men Birlashgan Millatlar Tashkilotining O'zbekistondagi vakolatxonasida faoliyat yuritaman va men bugungi uchrashuvimizni ochiq deb e'lon qilaman va mana shu uchrashuvimizni boshlashdan oldin bevosita bir ikkita texnik masalalar bo'yicha sizlarga e'lon qilmoqchiman. Bugungi bizni tadbirimiz 1,5 soat davomida davom etadi va o'ylaymanki sizning faolligingiz, o'zaro hamjihatligingiz bizga asqotadi va savollaringizni bevosita mana shu bizning tadbirimizni ikkinchi anjuman davomida berishingiz mumkin va biz mana shu tadbir davomida sizlarning savollaringizni kutib qolamiz. Bu savollarni siz bevosita mana shu chat kompyuteringiz o'ng qismiga berishingiz mumkin. Bevosita menga private message yozishingiz mumkin yoki qo'lingizni ko'tarsangiz men mana shu jarayonni boshqarish uchun menga ancha yordam beradi. Biz bugungi tadbirimizni bevosita mana shu yoshlar bilan muloqot qilish sifatida ham rejalashtirdik. O'ylaymanki sizlarning faolliklaring va shijoat va g'ayratingiz bizga ham bir kuch bag'ishlaydi va birinchi bizni o'sha spikerimizni tanishtirishdan oldin men bevosita bir interaktiv tarzda o'tkazmoqchimiz bugungi tadbirimizni va mana shu tadbir oldidan hamkasblarimdan iltimos qilardim. Kichkinagina bir so'rovnoma bor. Bevosita mana shu kambag'allik va qashshoqlik muammosiga bag'ishlangan. Agar mumkin bo'lsa mana shu savollarimizni ekranga chiqarsak va ishtirokchilarimiz 20 sekund davomida mana shu savollarga javob berishlari mumkin. Men savollarni o'qib beraman. Bashoratlarga ko'ra 2020-yilda COVID-19 pandemiyasi natijasida ayrim milliongacha kishi mutlaqo o'ta qashshoqlikda kuniga $1.9 ham kam bo'lgan pulga yashash va 2021-yilga kelib ularning umumiy soni milliongacha yetadi. Marhamat, mana shunda 3 ta opsiya bor. 3 ta opsiyani tanlab biz mana shu so'rovnomani o'tkazmoqdamiz. Bu yerda yana 10 sekund qoldi. Marhamat, ishtirok etamiz. Faol, men ko'rib turibman. 5 sekund vaqtimiz qoldi. Marhamat, oxirgi Marhamat, ikkinchi savolga o'tamiz. Bashoratlarga ko'ra 2020-yilda COVID-19 pandemiyasi natijasida milliongacha kishi mutlaqo o'ta qashshoqlikda, kechirasiz, menimcha ikkinchi savol. Rahmat. Jahon bankining bashoratlariga ko'ra COVID-19 pandemiyasi natijasida O'zbekistonda avgust oyi holatiga ko'ra qashshoqlikda yashovchilar soni yanagacha ko'paygan. Ishtirokchilarimiz juda ham faol ishtirok etmoqdalar. Bu o'ta muhim. Oxirgi 10 sekund qoldi, iltimos. Ajoyib natijalar, ajoyib natijalar. Marhamat, bo'lmasam ikkinchi savolni yakunlaymiz. Juda faollik bilan ishtirok etishdi bizni ishtirokchilarimiz. Bitta narsani men ta'kidlab o'tmoqchi edim. Bu ikkita savolni biz berganimiz sabab bevosita mana shu keyingi bizning spikerimiz mana shu mavzularda ham o'z fikrlarini berib o'tadi. Bu bizning spikerimiz bizga tanish muhtaram Matilda Dimovskaya, Birlashgan Millatlar Tashkilotining taraqqiyot dasturining O'zbekistondagi rahbari. Barcha yoshlarimiz biladi, mana ayniqsa pandemiya davrida Birlashgan Millatlar Tashkiloti juda ham faol, mana shu pandemiyaning birinchi kunlaridan boshlab juda ham faol ishlab kelishdi. Og'ir paytlarda ham mana shu Toshkent shahridan boshlab to shu Qoraqalpog'iston Respublikasining eng uzoq Mo'ynoq, Qo'ng'irot tumanlarida ham o'sha ko'ngillilar bilan bevosita ishlab, mana shu shifokorlar bilan bevosita ishlab juda ham ko'p ishlarni amalga oshirishdi va mana shu fursatdan foydalanib yana bir bor Matilda Dimovskiy xolimni bu yerda ko'rishdan juda xursandman va marhamat, xolim Dimovskiy, so'z sizga.
Rahmat Anvar, assalomu alaykum aziz tadbir ishtirokchilari. Sorry for this. Let me sort it out how I speak normal. I hope everything is okay. Let me thank you indeed for participating in this forum to observe the International Day for the Eradication of Poverty, directly related to the Sustainable Goal #1, which is about ending the poverty in all its forms everywhere by 2030. You know, in a world that is characterized by unprecedented level of economic development with the technological means, with financial resources, that the people are still living in poverty is a kind of a moral outrage. And there is a fundamental connection ultimately between the eradicating of the poverty and upholding the principles of equal rights for all. So therefore, mobilizing all of us around this topic is extremely important. And I find this event within that context and with that kind of a call for all of us. For almost 3 decades, extreme poverty has been steadily in decline in the world. And if 30 years ago, around 1/3 of the people were living in extreme poverty, which is on $1.8 per day or less, now less than 10 people are in that situation. Along with that global trend, Uzbekistan also made considerable progress over the last 2 decades. National poverty rate fell from 24% in 2000 to around 11% in 2019, which means that 2.2 million people of Uzbekistan were lifted out of poverty. But then the COVID-19 arrived. So in a very short period of time, our world has changed completely. The businesses were closed, the schools were canceled, we were all sitting home. And therefore, globally, it is projected that, and I'm very glad, I think that the response that you gave is correct one, that the pandemic pushed up to 115 million people more into the extreme poverty this year. And this is the first increase of the poverty levels in decades. And women and young people are hit especially hard from the pandemic. Uzbekistan is, of course, not an exception to the pandemic. The pandemic has wiped away many of the achieved gains. According to the different estimates, more than 1 million people might have fallen into poverty in Uzbekistan. Again, you made a good selection there. Still, we see that the government of Uzbekistan has shown a strong commitment to eradicate poverty in Uzbekistan. The president raised the poverty topic, eradication issue, back in January of this year, and since then has re-emphasized the poverty reduction as the highest priority of the government in the longer-term development effort, but also in the COVID response as the COVID crisis unfolded. With our colleagues from the World Bank, United Nations Development Programme renewed its commitment to support the government in this and to coordinate the poverty eradication effort among the other development partners. One thing that we will be discussing, I wish to stress, and it's about the multidimensional nature of the poverty, closely tied, linked to the social inequalities like the gender disparity or discrimination of people with disabilities. And eliminating poverty does not mean just providing a social assistance, but also means even more broader, building an inclusive society, therefore, for these reasons. So the theme of the International Day this year is about addressing the challenge of achieving social and environmental justice for all, and calls for acting together of all of us to achieve it. Indeed, we need bold actions. We need innovative ideas from the future leaders, from the activists, thinkers, entrepreneurs of tomorrow. We need action of and ideas of you. So therefore, I hope that we organize this event, and I hope that it will result with new ideas. It is so exciting to see that so many from you across Uzbekistan are part of it. Many have approached me already through the social media, and I'm very pleased about it. Please do continue so. Thank you for participating, and let's have in mind that the poverty is not inevitable, and we can fight it together. Etin boringi suçun kata rahmat.
Katta rahmat Matilda xonim, siz bevosita mana shu har doim vaqt topib mana shu yoshlar bilan va yosh faollar bilan ishtirok etishni juda ham ma'qul ko'rasiz va men esimda o'sha oxirgi bizning parlamentdagi yosh parlament a'zolari bilan uchrashuvimiz ham juda ijobiy ruhda o'tgan edi va sizga minnatdorchilik bildiraman va shu siz yana ta'kidlab o'tdingiz, mana shu qashshoqlikni yo'q qilish, uni bartaraf etish uchun bevosita nafaqat ijtimoiy muhofaza qilish kerak, balki mana shu jamiyatda afsuski ortda qolib ketayotgan jamiyatning turli vakillarini ham mana shu jarayonga jalb etish lozim. Sizga katta rahmat. Men o'ylaymanki, mana shu hozirdan bizga savollar kelish boshladi. Mana private anaqaga, messajga menga kelyapti savollar, lekin savollarimizni iltimos keyingi o'sha oxirroq qoldiramiz. O'ylaymanki, savollar juda ham ko'p bo'ladi. Keyingi so'zni bizni ikkinchi spikerimiz, ya'ni o'sha Jahon bankining O'zbekistondagi vakolatxonasining rahbari janob Marko Montanaro. Yes.
Улугбек, пожалуйста, язык на английский, перейдите язык на английский, вы не переводите куда надо. Пожалуйста, на английский. No way, please.
Yeah, I can hear you now. This is Marco.
Janob Pantavaneli, sizni ko'rib turganimizda juda xursandmiz. Janob Pantavaneli o'zining O'zbekistondagi faoliyatini shu yil iyul oyida boshladilar. O'zbekistonga yana bir bor xush kelibsiz. Meni fikrimcha bu sizning O'zbekiston yoshlari bilan birinchi muloqotingiz, lekin men xohlardimki bu birinchi, lekin oxirgi muloqot emas. Albatta siz juda ham tajribali mutaxassis va mana shu faoliyatingizda bevosita O'zbekiston yoshlarini ham mana shu Jahon bankining asosiy missiyasini amalga oshirishda ham sizning nima deydi tajribangizdan foydalangan holda yoshlar ham bevosita ishtirok etishadi. Marhamat, so'z sizga janob Pantavaneli.
Thank you very much, and assalamu alaikum, aziz dostlar. Indeed, it's a pleasure to be here with you all today. It is my first meeting with such a large group of young people in Uzbekistan since I took over this job in July. Let me start by thanking Matilda and thanking Mr. Alisher Sadululayev, the head of the Agency for Youth Affairs. I was co-hosting this webinar. I understand that Alisher and a group of young people volunteered during the pandemic to provide help to low-income family, the elderly, the sick, and I was really impressed to hear that. And if any of the young people that volunteered during those days are here, it would be great to hear their voices. Congratulations. We are here today, indeed, to recognize the work and the fight against poverty all over the world. I joined the World Bank, well, many years ago when my age was closer to the age of many participants here. And one of the reasons that drove me to the World Bank was its mission, end poverty, which, by the way, it's here on my phone to this day, and poverty. It sounds simple, but it's much more complex than the slogan. But that simple slogan has so much meaning for many people. Matilda mentioned it. We have seen, and I have in similar meetings on poverty days over the years since I joined the World Bank, meeting with young people, meeting with media, where we have constantly recognized progress. You know, over the last 20, 25 years, extreme poverty was steadily declining. Of course, that didn't mean that everybody was getting out of poverty, but it meant a large and unprecedented number of people were getting out of poverty. Poverty was becoming more concentrated in certain regions of the world or sub-region of certain countries, more linked to issues of conflicts or climate change. But unfortunately, this constant decline has now come to a sudden halt. We publish at the World Bank every year an annual report on poverty, and this year the title is A Reversal of Fortune, which indicates a turnaround of this trend. COVID is indeed the major culprit, and I was impressed by the poll where most of the participants recognize the impact. If we extend that poll to 2021, we could have up to 150 million of people falling into extreme poverty, the most severe form of poverty due to COVID-19, and the economic limitations that the fight to the virus imposes. But as I said before, the trend was of poverty decline around the world was already coming to a slowdown before COVID. Conflicts played a big role. In the Middle East and North Africa, for example, extreme poverty nearly doubled between 2015 and 2018 from 3.8% to 7.2%, spurred by the conflict in Syria and in Yemen. Climate change alone may drive 100 million people, additional people into poverty by 2030. So these are big global challenges that require global answers. You know, we know that Uzbekistan is not immune to this. It is facing one of the most severe economic crises since, you know, the breakup from the Soviet Union. GDP growth from an healthy growth is slowing down to, you know, still in positive territory, but almost to no growth. And this is having consequences of people, as always. My colleague will talk later, will probably mention his work, his polling of Uzbekistan citizens, where we know that the number of households that experience loss of jobs or more difficulty in putting food on the table is increasing, unfortunately. So there is the priority is to mitigate the impact of what is happening around the world. And we, the World Bank, the United Nations, we are working closely with the national authorities in Uzbekistan and in other countries to try to mitigate the impact. Everybody is hoping that soon a vaccine will bring us back to a normal situation, but even then it will take some time to recover to the situation we were experiencing before the pandemic. So mitigating is the first priority, but the next one is to look beyond, to look at the medium term. Like every crisis, there is an opportunity in the crisis, and we are firm believers in that. Now is the time to look beyond the pandemic and look at what was not really working in the economic models and in the growth models we were pursuing in Uzbekistan and around the world. This is the time to look at ways to build back in a more sustainable, inclusive, bringing in as many people as possible benefiting from growth, and resilient growth. So sustainable, inclusive, resilient. In a word, build back better. This is an opportunity that is in front of us. Not easy, but this is what we want to work with. We at the World Bank, we are determined to continue to work on this. We were encouraged by President Mirziyev's emphasis at the United Nations General Assembly recently, emphasis on poverty reduction and job creation. This is fundamental, and we will continue to put our financial and technical assistance at the service of the country to achieve these goals. In particular, with a focus on youth, jobs and jobs for youth. This is critical in a country with a demographic as Uzbekistan, but it's critical to ensure the future of society, a sustainable society. Investing in youth is the right recipe. So I am really glad to be here. I look forward to the discussion, and I thank again the organizer for having us participate in this event. Thank you very much.
Marko, sizga minnatdorchilik bildiramiz. Albatta boshda ta'kidlab o'tgandek, bu mavzu biroz jiddiy, ba'zida bir ma'yus mavzu. Shu odamlar qashshoqlik, kambag'alchilik deganda eshitganda albatta bir negativ bir tuyg'ular paydo bo'ladi, lekin sizni mana shu nutqingizda bir o'sha o'zlikka, ya'ni yangi o'zlikka qaytish va ana shu qaytish yanada ham yaxshi bo'lishi haqida bir ijobiy fikrlaringizni bildirdingiz. Ya'ni o'sha nutqingizda o'sha optimizmni bir ko'rinishlar paydo bo'ldi va men o'ylaymanki, albatta bu qaytish birgalikda bo'ladi. Qachon bu biz eski hayotga qaytamiz, buni hali biz bilmaymiz, lekin albatta bu haqida biz hozirni o'zida o'ylashimiz kerak. Sizga katta rahmat. fikrlaringiz uchun. Endi men ishtirokchilardan iltimos qilib qolardim. Menimcha suhbatimiz hozir yaxshi ketmoqda. Biroz mana shu suhbatimizga yana bir nima deydi, shu pozitiv anaqasini berish uchun iltimos, agar 15 sekundga barcha o'zini kamerasini yoqib, bir-birimizga shu tabassumni bersak, qo'limizni ko'tarib, nazarimda hech kim hali uxlab qolgani yo'q. Hali jiddiy mavzular oldinda. Yana iltimos, bu yerda yana biz o'sha biz ijtimoiy sahifalarimizga rasmlarni, suratlarni beramiz va mana shu O'zbekistonda yirik tashkilotlar, birgalikda davlat tashkilotlari, yoshlar ham mana shu mavzuni hal qilishda birgalikda ishlashmoqda degan bir mavzuni beramiz. Men keyingi ishtirokchimizni tanishtirmoqchi edim. Bu ishtirokchini O'zbekistonda yashayotgan, nafaqat O'zbekistonda, mana shu O'zbekistonda yashab faoliyat yuritgan ko'p vatandoshlarimiz ham juda ham yaxshi bilishadi. Men o'zim ham mana shu insonni juda ham hurmat qilaman. Samimiy bir inson va Marko boya ta'kidlab o'tdi, yoshlar u paytda Yoshlar ittifoqi deb nomlangan tashkilot edi. Ana shu pandemiyaning birinchi kunlarida mana shu yigit va qizlar Alisher Sa'dullayev boshchiligida mana shu pandemiyada bevosita ko'ngillilar safida mana shu, agar front desak ham bo'ladi, shu frontning birinchi chizig'ida faoliyat yuritishdi. Men so'zni mamnuniyat bilan Alisher Sa'dullayevga, yoshlar bo'yicha agentlikning direktoriga so'z beraman. Marhamat Alisher.
Assalomu alaykum hurmatli do'stlar. Assalomu alaykum Matilda xonim. Assalomu alaykum Marko. Men mana shu uchrashuvda qatnashib turganimdan juda ham xursandman. Aslida bu juda og'ir uchrashuv, sababi biz o'sha qashshoqlik haqida gapirganimizda boya Anvar aka juda bir ta'sirli gapni aytdilar. Insonlarning ko'z oldiga bir o'sha qayg'uli damlar ko'ziga keladi, o'sha qiyinchilikda yashayotgan, umidsizlik, o'sha najot ko'rmaslik va umuman mana shu bir tasavvur paydo bo'ladi bizda shunaqa. Va shu sohada, ayniqsa yoshlar sohasida, juda keng qamrovli sohada mana shunaqa vaziyatdan chiqib ketish, jarayonda qatnashish, men yosh hukumat vakili sifatida mana yoshlarga, atrofdagilarga bir o'zimning fikrim juda ham bir tarafdan maroqli. Nimaga? Krizisni yechish uchun, ya'ni inqirozdan chiqish uchun har doim insonlar yangicha fikrlashi, yangi g'oyalar, tarix hali misol uchun bu narsani amaliy isbotini topmagan yechimlar yoki bir yangicha usul bilan yondashishga majbur bo'ladi. Bunaqa holatlarni juda ko'p davlatlarning misolida ko'rganmiz. Aynan mana shu aytaylik rivojlanish davridan rivojlanib o'sha xalqini manfaatini, farovonligini oshirgan. Men o'ylaymanki, davlatimiz rahbari hurmatli Shavkat Miromonovich Mirziyoyev ham butun jamoalari, umuman butun g'oyalari, fikrlari bilan xalqaro hamjamiyat bilan oxirgi yillarda mana shu xalqaro hamjamiyat bilan ham do'stlashganimiz, ular bilan muloqot qilishimiz, ular bilan doimiy aloqada bo'lishimiz ham O'zbekistonni men o'ylaymanki, mana shunaqa rivojlanish, buni ingliz tilida ham aytishadi, turning point deyishadi, ya'ni ruslarda переломный moment, o'sha juda bir jiddiy pallada men o'ylaymanki, mana shu xalqaro hamjamiyatni qo'llab-quvvatlov va ulardagi taklif fikrlar juda ham muhim. Lekin baribir O'zbekistonning o'zini ham xarakteri, millatning xarakteri, umuman jamiyatdagi fuqarolarni davlatiga bo'lgan ishonchi, uni amalga oshirayotgan g'oyalari, siyosatini qo'llab-quvvatlashi ham men o'ylaymanki, mana shu qashshoqlik insonlarni farovonligini, umuman mana shu hayotda yaxshi yashashiga amalda xizmat ko'rsatadigan bir asosiy elementlardan biri. Nimaga deb so'rasanglar, mana pandemiya davrida biz haqiqatan davlatimiz rahbari bir necha marta aytdi, boshqacha fikrlashni boshladik. Raqamli iqtisodiyotni rivojlantirish yili edi. Biz raqamli iqtisodiyotni mana ayniqsa pandemiya davrida tushunib yetdik. Aslida umuman inson hayotida raqamli harakatlanmasa, raqamli reja qilmasa, mana pandemiya davrida, karantin vaqtida umuman harakatlanish qiyin. Butun iqtisodiyot to'xtab qoladi. Butun tarmoqlar, butun tizim, butun bir rivojlanish sikli to'xtab qolishini misolini ko'rdik. Oddiy misol, pandemiya davrida mana oddiy misol keltiradigan bo'lsam, balkim o'sha restoranlarda xizmat ko'rsatuvchi ofitsiantlarga ish kamayib, ammo misol uchun oziq-ovqat tashuvchi kuryerlarga bo'lgan talabni ortib ketishi. Bu ham misol uchun o'sha pandemiya davridagi moslashuvchanligini ko'rsatib beradi davlatni. Yana bitta misol uchun oddiy misol, pandemiya davrida mana shu oziq-ovqat yetkazib berganimizda, oddiy oziq-ovqat yetkazib berganda bir necha kompaniyalar oldin pandemiya davrigacha mana shunaqa yetkazib berish delivery xizmati bilan foydalangan bo'lsa, pandemiya davrida karantinda yuzlab o'sha tashkilotlar o'zini boshqacha ishlash mexanizmiga o'tishga majbur bo'ldi. Sababi insonlar bilan ishlashda yangicha usul, yangicha yondashuvdan boshqa yechim yo'q edi. Xuddi shunday hukumatda ham ana shu pandemiya davrida qashshoqlikni, kambag'allikni qisqartirish uchun bir necha strategiyalar bor edi va bu strategiyalardan unumli foydalanish uchun davlatimiz rahbari juda ko'p qaror, farmonlar qabul qildi. Men oddiy misol keltirmoqchiman. O'sha freelancerlar sohasiga e'tibor qaratmoqchiman. Ya'ni o'zini o'zi band qiluvchi o'sha shaxslar. Men ko'pchilik mana shu o'zini o'zini band qilgan sohada ishlagan yoshlar, vakillar meni gapimni tasdiqlashi mumkin. Biz pandemiya boshlanishidan oldin o'zini o'zi band qilgan shaxs kimligini ham bilmasdik. To'g'risi, eshitgan bo'lsak, kam eshitganmiz, bo'lgan, lekin o'zini o'zi band qilish uchun alohida qaror kerak. O'zini o'zi band qilgan shaxslarni soliqdan, misol uchun daromad solig'idan ozod qilish degan mexanizm bizda shakllanmagan edi. Lekin hukumat tezda buni o'ylab, o'zini o'zi band qilgan insonlar, tashqi o'sha aytaylik kompaniyalarga outsource xizmatini ko'rsatgan bo'lib, ulardan daromad olsa, biz ularga soliq qo'yishimiz kerak emas degan hukumat tez qaror chiqardi. Buning oqibatida juda ham ko'plab freelancerlar erkin ishlashga o'tdi. Ya'ni yopiq o'sha iqtisodiyotdan ko'proq ochiq iqtisodiyotga o'tib, registratsiya, ro'yxatdan o'tib, freelancer sifatida faoliyatini boshladi. Oddiy bitta misol. Ikkinchisi, mana oddiy misol, qishloq hududlarida bizda eng ko'p aholi, ko'pchiligidan xabaringlar bor, qishloq hududlariga, ya'ni ingliz tilida rural areas deyishadi, ya'ni urban areas shaharlar rural areasga kiradi, ya'ni o'sha qishloq sharoitida yashayotgan fuqarolarimiz. Ular bilan ishlashda ikkita asosiy o'sha yo'nalishga nisbatan keng bir imkoniyatlar ochildi. Birinchisi bu qishloq xo'jaligi. Qishloq xo'jaligida nima amalga oshirildi degan misol, mana Jahon banki vakillari juda yaxshi bilishadi. Bular qishloq xo'jaligi vazirligi bilan yaqindan ishlashadi bu sohada. Yangi konsept, ya'ni kooperativlar konseptini ishlab chiqish boshlandi. Oldin biz misol uchun fuqarolarni band qilish uchun to'g'ridan-to'g'ri bank orqali kredit bergan bo'lsak, endi yetakchi tadbirkor orqali yuzlab, minglab odamlarni kooperativga yig'yapmiz. Bu kooperativda har bitta oilaga misol uchun kimgadir misol uchun 2 ta qoramol, kimgadir 100 ta tovuq, kimgadir misol uchun issiqxona, kimgadir boshqa sohada yordam berish mexanizmlari ishlab chiqildi. Buni ichidagi asosiy kontingent yoshlar kontingenti. Chunki juda ko'p hozir mana oddiy ma'lumotni aytadigan bo'lsam, yiliga maktabning o'zidan 500 yoki 550 mingga yaqin bitiruvchilar ishchi bozoriga kirib keladi, 11-sinfni yakunlovchilar. Bular umumiy hisobga olganimizda oliy ta'lim muassasalarini bitiruvchilar, litsey, kollejni bitiruvchilar, maktabni oladigan bo'lsak, bular yaqin 500 milliondan oshib qolishadi. 500 milliondan oshiqcha yana yangi kuch har yili ishchi kuchi kirib keladi. Buni hisobga oladigan bo'lsak, qishloq sohalar, qishloq joylardagi o'sha qishloq xo'jaligini rivojlantirmasak, bu sohaga natijalarga erisha olmaymiz bu sohada. Va albatta buni rivojlantirish hukumatning doimiy masalasi bo'lib qoladi. Ikkinchi masala, e'tibor berayotgan bo'lsangiz kerak, o'sha ko'plab davlat rahbarining tashriflaridan umuman o'sha hududlarni ko'rsatishganda asosan o'sha tikuvchilik sexlarini ko'rsatishmoqda. Ya'ni bu ham Bangladesh tajribasidan, Bangladeshning asosiy o'sha eksportini o'sha tikuvchilik sexlari mahsulotlari, umuman tekstil mahsulotlari tashkil qiladi. Bunda ham asosiy kuch yoshlar va ayollarni qo'llab-quvvatlash. Umuman olganda men o'ylaymanki, bizga yoshlarimiz uchun eng kerakli tavsiya mana shunaqa qaltis iqtisodiy hamma uchun juda og'ir bo'lgan vaziyatda ikkita asosiy g'oyaga tayanish. Birinchisi bu lifelong learning deyishadi. Buni doimiy izlanish, butun hayoti davomida izlanish o'shani odat qilish inson o'ziga. Sababi ko'ryapsiz, bugungi o'sha o'rgangan kasblarimiz yoki sohamiz ertangi kunga to'g'ri kelmay qolyapti. Pandemiya buni isbotladi. Shuning uchun doimiy ravishda izlanish va o'rganishga e'tibor berishimiz kerak. O'zbekistonni faqatgina inson kapitaliga tikilgan sarmoya qutqara oladi. O'zbekistonni faqatgina rivojlanishiga inson kapitaliga tikilgan mablag' asosiy tayanch bo'la oladi. Buning uchun o'zimiz bilim olishimizga intilishimiz, doimiy ustimizda ishlashimiz, qo'shimcha xorijiy tillarni o'rganishimiz va albatta biror bir o'sha talabgor kasbni albatta o'rganishimiz bizdan talab qilinadi. Ikkinchisi, doimiy o'rganish bilan birgalikda buni reskilling, retraining deyshadi, ya'ni doimiy ravishda o'zimizni o'sha kasblarimizni o'zlashtirish va ularni ustida ishlash uchun izlanishda bo'lishimiz shart. Bu juda ham muhim. Agar bularni doimiy ravishda birga olib ketmasak, men o'ylaymanki, mana shu qashshoqlik, kambag'allik, umuman mana shu juda ko'p hozir pandemiyadan keyingi 200 millionga yaqin mana shu aytib o'tilgan kambag'allar, O'zbekistonda ham mana 1 millionga yaqin kambag'allar ta'siriga uchraydi degan shu ma'lumot aytildi. Men o'ylaymanki, mana shuni yengishda faqatgina biz o'sha inson kapitaliga investitsiya, bilim olishga investitsiya kiritibgina erisha olamiz. Bunda har birimiz mas'ulmiz, har birimiz o'rganishimiz, izlanishimiz orqaligina yechim topa olamiz. Hukumat esa albatta bu g'oyani ilgari surib, bunga ishonib, qanchalar qiyin bo'lmasin, ta'limga kiritilgan investitsiya qanchalik uzoq davrda bermasin o'zini foydasini. Bu sohaga ko'proq bilim va sohani rivojlantirish uchun maksimal ravishda investitsiya kiritishda qo'rqmasdan qadam tashlash kerak deb o'ylayman. Rahmat.
Alisher, samimiy fikrlaringiz uchun katta rahmat. Menimcha mana shu nutqni siz aytgan fikrlarni barcha yoshlarimiz ham, ekspertlarimiz ham eshitdi. Men bitta misolni keltirmoqchiman. Shu pandemiya davrida bevosita mana shu siz boshqarayotgan yoshlar agentligida bitta faol bilan gaplashganimda men bir telefon qilgandim, bir yaqin bir menga bir qadrdondim. 14-16 soat ishlayapmiz deb fikr bildirdi va aytdiki, men bundan juda ham mamnunman, chunki bunday pandemiyalar balki 100 yilda bir marta keladi. Va biz yoshlar uchun va men O'zbekiston fuqarosi uchun bu juda katta sharaf, o'zimni mamlakatim uchun xizmat qilish. 100 yilda bir kelayotgan bu baloni biz bevosita o'zimiz mana shu birinchi qatorda boshqalarga namuna bo'lib mana shu baloga qarshi kurashish biz uchun sharaf deganda, menimcha bu mana shu siz agentligingizni, boshqarayotgan agentligingizning xodimlarining asosiy shiori ham va kunlik bir mazmuni ham desa bo'ladi. Sizga katta rahmat. Men o'ylaymanki, bu yerda sizga boshqa ishtirokchilar ham o'zlarining savollarini berishadi va mamnuniyat bilan keyingi biz ishtirokchimizga, keyingi spikerimizga so'zni bermoqchi edim. Janob William Zates. William hozirgi kunda Jahon bankining Olmaota shahrida joylashgan mintaqaviy ofisida faoliyat yuritadi. Katta iqtisodchi va bugun mana shu bevosita bizda savollar ko'p. Kambag'allik nima bilan o'lchanadi? Kambag'allik nima u? Va bugungi kunda kelib, masalan, insonlarning farovonligiga, yurish-turishiga, uni turmushiga qanday ta'sir ko'rsatadi? Mana shu sohaning mutaxassisidan biz eshitib qolamiz. Marhamat, Will, so'z sizga.
Thank you very much. So let me see if I can share some slides so that just let me see. There we go. So just to confirm, you can see this, right?
Yes, we can see that.
Great. So just to go off of this question that you started us with, so what is poverty, or how do we usually measure it? So there are a variety of ways that countries look at this question, and also when we're trying to look at internationally comparable measures, there are another variety. But if you have sort of just the most abstract concept of poverty, there's sort of three components that are really important to understand. So the first is a welfare measure. And so the most common welfare measures that are used for poverty measurement are either income or consumption. So the idea of having a welfare measure is that you want to be able to rank people from the worst off to the best off, sort of in the abstract. So there's somebody who has the lowest income and there's somebody who has the highest income, and you can rank people in terms of their well-being along these dimensions. So this brings us to the second concept that's very important with poverty measurement, which is the poverty line. So the poverty line is a threshold somewhere in that distribution between the poorest and the richest person that gives us a threshold under which somebody is, doesn't have a sufficient amount of welfare. So finally, a third concept is what you're used to seeing in sort of national statistics, a poverty index. So the most common of these would be the poverty headcount ratio. So it's the share of the population who is living in poverty, for instance. But there are many other indexes as well. And so these three concepts are sort of key to understanding what we're talking about when we're talking about the measurement of poverty. So there's one common definition, which several people have referred to. Matilda and Marco talked about this as well. The international poverty line, which is a sort of a measure of extreme poverty. And this is $1.90 per person per day in something called purchasing power parity. So purchasing power parity means that rather than just taking $1.90, sort of a US dollar, what we're trying to do is we're trying to adjust for the differences in the cost of living in different countries and then making it comparable. So when we say purchasing power parity, we're talking about a $1.90 per person per day after adjusting for the cost of living in different places, which can vary quite substantially. So some countries are more, it's less costly to live in some countries than in others. So this isn't just a regular exchange rate. It's important to understand. So the way that this was initially developed was by taking the median value of the national poverty lines of low-income countries. So each country usually has their own definition of poverty that's tailored to the specific needs of each country. And so for the international definition, what was done was some experts took a database of all of the national poverty lines of a group of low-income countries and took the median value of those, and that's how they set this line. This is administered by the World Bank for the Sustainable Development Goals, for the monitoring of the Sustainable Development Goals. And if we use this line in Uzbekistan, there's very little poverty by this definition. And that's to be expected because Uzbekistan is a lower middle income country. So the poverty lines that we're referring to here are the average among low income countries, and Uzbekistan has a higher income per person, a substantially higher income per person than low income countries do. If we look at what's happened since the outbreak of COVID-19, we can see that the projections from the World Bank are pretty dire, pretty severe. So the impact is expected to push between 88 and 115 million people into extreme poverty this year. And there are some different scenarios that have been estimated on the basis of these calculations, but the situation is more severe than at any time since World War II, likely. And it's the first time that global poverty has been increasing since 1998. So it's a very severe situation that we find ourselves in today. But as I was mentioning, for Uzbekistan, this sort of extreme definition of poverty is not very often applied. Not very many people are poor by this definition, and so what the World Bank has done in our analysis is that we have what are called income class poverty lines. So these lines are using a similar method. So taking lower middle income countries and averaging across the national poverty lines, or taking the median across them, we get a value of $3.20 per person per day. If we look at upper middle income countries, the average or the median is about 5.5 per person per day. And so when we're talking about poverty in countries that are better off, we use the median value of poverty lines in the countries that are relevant, in the relevant bracket. And the reason for this is, as you can see on the right-hand side graph, as countries become more prosperous, they become more ambitious in terms of what poverty is and what a minimum standard of living should be. So as countries have developed and have higher incomes, they commonly have more ambitious poverty lines that are at a higher threshold. So if we zoom into Central Asia, and looking at specifically the situation, that we are projecting to have happened, over the last several months, we can see that, the economies of Central Asia have also suffered as well. And we expect that, there's a lot of uncertainty about how severe the impact has been. There are several sort of open questions about how severe some of these impacts have been. But in particular, if we take across all of the countries in Central Asia, we think that about 1.6 million additional poor people, if we use the $3.2 per person per day line, and about 2.6 or maybe 2.7 million people might be poor according to the upper middle income line. The primary driver of this in Uzbekistan and elsewhere has been disruptions in the labor market. So the lockdowns in particular and the lack of safety and the actions that have been taken to preserve public safety have meant that people are unable to work in their normal sort of capacity. And what this has meant is that a lot of people have been out of work for an extended period of time. So we can see when the outbreak sort of really was at its peak in April, or when the lockdowns and when the disruptions in employment were at their peak in April, the share of households who were reporting any member working fell by more than 40 percentage points. So a very severe decline. This was concentrated in particular among those who were self-employed. So the downturn was most severe among people who were not working in formal employment. And this is oftentimes because some people in the formal labor market could work from home, or they had different arrangements, whereas a lot of self-employed people were working in services, sometimes in construction, sometimes in other related sectors where there were larger disruptions and there was more face-to-face interaction that couldn't take place in a safe way. It was very heartening to see that in May and in June, with the removal of of lockdown measures, the labor market started very quickly recovering. And so, there was a lot of concern in the early stages of the pandemic that some of these job losses might be permanent. And so it was very encouraging to see that the bounce back was quite rapid when the lockdown measures were released. That said, when they were reintroduced due to the increasing risk of infection, again in July and August, we saw a flattening out or a slowdown in the recovery. And so this underscores the importance of as around the world, trying to get a handle or trying to control the outbreak is really key to having a full labor market recovery. We can look at that also in a spatial dimension, so not just across time, but across space. We partnered with government counterparts to use administrative data to disaggregate these information using statistical models at the local level. So this is for districts in Uzbekistan, and we can see that there was not very many places in the country that had a large share of households reporting that nobody was working in the last 7 days in March of 2020. But moving to April, almost the entire country had very severe impacts on the labor market. Of course, it's not uniform. So a lot of places had more severe impacts than some of in particular, very rural areas had lower impacts because many of the activities that people were undertaking were not disrupted, in particular in agriculture. However, in urban areas, there was also some protection for those people who were formally working and working potentially remotely. So a lot of the most severe impacts were densely populated areas that were not in the core of cities, where we estimate the largest impacts. So starting from March, there were almost no really large concentrations of people out of the labor force or not working. In April, it was very severe. In some areas, it was much more severe than others. And the recovery in May was encouraging, but again, it's not uniform. So there were some parts of the country that were coming back more slowly than others. And in June, again, still some concentrations of people out of work. And we can see this, having impacts also on forward-looking indicators. So one of the most important forward-looking indicators is how many jobs are available for people to apply for. And this is important particularly for youth because oftentimes when there's a downturn, there are fewer jobs available, and the people who are first to get good jobs that are coming online are often those people who have the most experience. And so when we think about sort of who suffers the most, it's the people who are at the just beginning their labor market interactions or just beginning their career, who are going to struggle the most trying to get on that first rung of the ladder in employment. And so what we saw is that there was a big surge and a big increase in the absence of lockdown measures when it was safer for people to be working. But in July, with the reintroduction, again, the number of positions that were being posted online declined yet again. And this was, the recovery was very quick in construction, and in some areas, such as tourism and recreation, the recovery is still very far away from where it was last year at this time. So the labor market issues or the questions around sort of a focus on getting people to work and making jobs available to people who are vulnerable is an enduring finding that we have in our monitoring of the situation. In a survey called Listening to Citizens of Uzbekistan, which is also the source of these statistics I was describing before, we ask questions about what people's priorities are. And enduringly, the most critical one when people are talking about development priorities in the country is a strong labor market, creating enough jobs and making sure that people have opportunities for employment. This is almost always an urgent priority. And I think very tellingly, it's viewed as an urgent priority both for men and women. So it's not a question of particular subpopulations for whom this is more important. When we ask a representative sample of the population, this is an enduring finding that this is a high priority issue. That is, when we combine that with sort of who is looking for work, so this is coming from 2018, we can see that youth, our youth and women are overrepresented among those people who are looking for work and who are trying to find jobs. And this dovetails with what I was saying before, that sort of people with more experience, people who are older and have a longer track record in employment are more easily employable or already have longer term jobs, whereas people who are just entering the labor market are the ones that really struggle when there's a downturn and when there are fewer jobs available. Another really important channel that has been affecting our projections of the poverty rate in Uzbekistan are remittance income. So remittances are a very important driver of poverty reduction in Uzbekistan. And that's because a lot of the places that send the most migrants abroad are places that have lower incomes and lower poverty rate or higher poverty rates. And so when remittances fall, it is disproportionately among those people who who really rely on remittances quite a lot. In some parts of the country, among the people who receive it, this might be 30 to 50% of their income. And what we can see is that there was a big decline in April, in particular with the weakening of the ruble. At around that time, there were many fewer people sending remittances home. But that started to recover with the strengthening of the ruble thereafter. So in May, June, and July, the share of those who are abroad sending remittances started increasing again. But the share of households who have one migrant abroad or are receiving remittances is well below where it was last year. And expectations of sending additional people abroad have nearly collapsed. So there's not, there are almost no people in our surveys who are saying that, in the immediate term, people are going to be going abroad for work, as we would expect. I mean, given that it's, in most cases, severely restricted. So this suggests that the issue with remittance dependency among specific households that have migrants abroad and spend a lot of that on basic needs, those households are likely going to struggle for some time. It's going to take some time for this to recover, given that there are not more migrants going abroad at this that we observe in our surveys. So we can also, in the same way, looking at employment, we can look at that in spatial terms. So in March, there were spatial concentrations in the places that are receiving more remittances, and in April that declined substantially. So there were many fewer households who were receiving remittances in April during that period of time when the ruble was declining and fewer people were working in Russia and elsewhere. However, this started recovering a bit in May, and in particular, it started recovering in places that have low average income. And so this is also a source of resilience, in fact, that the places that had a lower income were actually the fastest to start recovering and having more remittances to them. And so this has stabilized the incomes of some households who were particularly vulnerable. And in June, again, we saw an increase. So this is an encouraging trend that there is some recovery in this area as well. So one area that has been a particular concern around the world is the disruptions in the education of youth and children. So school closures, it is worried, have led to a loss of the equivalent of learning. So as much as a third of a year of schooling has been lost on average. And this is likely to exacerbate some inequality. So in some cases, those who have more resources are able to compensate, are able to respond more easily than those who have fewer resources. And this might create an inequality between people who are better off and less well off over time. So, and this is one of the opportunity areas, I think, building on what Marco had referred to before about building back better, that Uzbekistan has a relatively lower share of the population who are attending tertiary education. And in the period of recovery, investing in tertiary education and further education and skills is an area that can build a stronger foundation for recovery, not only to recover, but also in the intervening period or in the following period for long-term economic growth. This is a type of investment that has very sort of enduring priority among the population, and something that's often referred to as a no regrets sort of investment. So investing in education is something that usually has a very high return over a very long and sustained period of time. And if you ask people about in our surveys about what their priorities are, education is again another area where people feel very comfortable and very strongly about increasing investment and increasing the quality of education over time. So, we mentioned a little bit, and I think my colleague Ricardo, who's going to speak after me, is going to talk a little bit more about this, but we're working closely with the government on the development of a new national definition of poverty. So there are a variety of different alternative measures that are being evaluated at this time. And a new survey to try to assess the extent of poverty and the correlates of poverty was launched in February 2019 by Goskomstat. And this survey has been collecting very detailed information on well-being since that time. So the idea is to develop a measure of that's very tailored and specific to the situation in Uzbekistan, and then to use that as one of to anchor one of the targets or one of the key targets for the poverty reduction strategy that's under development. And of course, beyond this measure of monetary poverty, one of the other main objectives of this activity is to define poverty in all its forms. So in a multidimensional sense, and to monitor the progress on those priorities going forward. Just to sort of wrap up, I think one important question here is sort of what the ambition is, or how high the ambition goes. And so, for sure, in the immediate term, returning the country, the economy to the strong growth that it had before the outbreak is key. Without returning to economic growth, it's very, very difficult to achieve the other development objectives that the country has. But just recovering is not enough. Of course, the national development strategy envisions a much more ambitious goal of a very prosperous and thriving economy and society. And this is very consistent with what other countries have done, in their sort of long-term goal-setting strategies. That as countries become more prosperous, they become more ambitious about what the minimum standard of living should be for a country. And so, in this, there's, there is the objective of ending poverty, but there's also the objective of achieving good health, strong education, a safe environment, and other important dimensions of well-being going forward. Another important objective is to improve the resilience of society so that not only is poverty eradicated, but people are not at risk of falling back into poverty during a crisis. And this, one way of framing this that we often discuss, with partners is, an objective of building a middle-class society where people are durably and reliably out of risk, out of danger of falling into poverty. So I thank you very much for your time, and I hope that we have some time for questions and discussion. But I would also like to hand it over to the moderator and my colleague Ricardo for more discussion. Thank you very much.
Katta rahmat sizga. Bu yerda sizga bevosita ikkita savol tushdi. Buni keyin keyingi spikerimizdan keyin sizga murojaat qilamiz. Keyingi spikerimiz marhamat Ricardo Pinto, ishlayotgan bo'lsangiz, BMT taraqqiyot dasturining mas'ul xodimi. Ricardo.
Yeah, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can perfectly hear you. Yeah, go ahead.
So good afternoon to everybody. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to talk with you today. I'm working with UNDP, and UNDP is trying to assist the government to put together the poverty reduction strategy. Of course, not just UNDP, but many other organizations, World Bank, many partners from the international community are supporting the government as well. I'd just like to make some general comments about COVID-19 before I talk specifically about the poverty reduction strategy. So the first point to make is, of course, that this is a global pandemic and it's affecting every country. And of course, it's affecting these countries in a differential way, of course. But the other point that we have to make immediately is that there is no doubt that COVID-19 has had an effect. And the effect is that it's an accelerator. It's an accelerator of poverty and disadvantage. And the consequence of that, picking up on Will's earlier point about global poverty levels and so on, it has the potential to reverse decades worth of progress across the globe. And I mean across the globe. We've heard a great deal about the effects in terms of Uzbekistan, and the surveys and analysis that have been carried out. It's absolutely fantastic, the level of detail that's available, but it's all relative. And the latest information I heard about America, for example, United States of America, is that the COVID-19 effect, even at that level of society, has been enormous. Something in the region of 6 million people have fallen into poverty as a result of the COVID effect. So this is something extremely serious, and obviously all governments are trying to do something about that. Now, turning back to Uzbekistan. Our main counterpart in the organization that's leading the process is Ministry of Economic Development and Poverty Reduction. That part of the title, poverty reduction, is a relatively recent development. It basically has been added to the title of the ministry in recognition of the salience and importance of this issue. And this is, of course, means that the president, the government, is prioritizing this process now. Not only in Uzbekistan, it should be said, because I'm currently working in other countries as well, like Kazakhstan, Ukraine, Ethiopia, and so on. Similar processes happening there as well. There is some degree of reluctance to call it poverty reduction strategies in certain countries, but ultimately this is what it's about because of this issue of accelerator and dealing with that. Now, of course, I think you're all aware of the fact that poverty is multidimensional in nature. So in terms of the strategy that we're hoping to support the ministry with, inevitably it has to cover a variety of dimensions. So Will's presentation showed really nicely a variety of these elements. He picked up on the issue of education. We talked about the labor market, and of course, within the labor market, the youth dimension is particularly important. And in our analysis of poverty reduction strategy, we have to demonstrate what we're going to do about it, because traditionally youth unemployment is higher than average in any case. And for the reasons that we'll set out, there are significant consequences for youth as well, because they're going to find it even harder. In certain countries, governments are already planning or initiating various subsidies to try to encourage enterprises to continue to open opportunities for young people, because they're pretty risk averse, and their focus tends to be on, as was said by Will, on more experienced workers or retaining the existing workers rather than taking on new workers. So this is a dimension within the labor market part of the analysis of poverty reduction, which we were going to have to address: youth unemployment, how to deal with that, as well as other dimensions of youth and education and so on. Of course, social protection systems are a critical factor in here. Health, various aspects of social infrastructure, and so on. These are the various dimensions that we'll be exploring. But in the analysis of poverty reduction, we have to pick out certain key elements which are considered to be, let's say, cross-sectoral or cross-cutting in their nature. The gender dimension is very clear, that we have to address that particular aspect in some way. Other aspects include, for example, the environment. This is a factor that has to be put into every strategy nowadays in order to think about long-term consequences of the environment. Another one which we're thinking about is regional aspects, because there are significant variations. I'm a geographer in terms of my first degree, and I loved Will's presentation because he put in several maps to illustrate geographical distribution and variations, and this is a very powerful tool. So therefore, in the analysis that we hope to present for this poverty reduction strategy, we would also want to focus on the regional variations across the country, which are really, really important. I'd like to tell you a little bit about the process in terms of what this poverty reduction strategy will do and who's responsible for what. The main point, of course, is that this is the government's initiative, it's its strategy, and the institution that's responsible for this is the Ministry of Economic Development and Poverty Reduction. So they have the overall control and responsibility. Institutions such as ours, ILO, World Bank, etc., can only support this process. And we can support this process, of course, in several important ways. One is to produce the kind of analysis that Will has highlighted, but much more, because there are many different institutional players out there that have a particular emphasis. For example, the ILO tends to focus on the labor market, so it can bring in all sorts of perspectives, not just in terms of the analysis itself, but even more importantly, to come up with policy recommendations in terms of how to address certain of those issues, like, for example, youth unemployment. Of course, good practice, international good practice is useful, but everything has to be calibrated for the realities on the ground. And of course, Uzbekistan has its own realities, but not only that, COVID-19 has its own specificities. It is something which is evolving, and therefore even the best international good practice does not help, because ultimately you have to find new ways, different ways of doing things. And this is going to be part of the challenge that we have. So the role of international organizations such as ours is to assist your government to come up with as good a set of analysis and policy recommendations, measures to address the poverty challenges as possible. Of course, we can only make proposals. It's ultimately up to the government to decide what of those proposals it will take up and how it will continue in the process and what will actually be presented in the end. So the way it works is that the ministry has overall responsibility. We feed analysis and so on into the ministry. At the moment, we had the situation where the World Bank and the UN system has presented a draft structure of what this poverty reduction strategy should look like, taking into consideration the various elements I've set out earlier, and offered to present the analysis and policy recommendations from our perspective. At the next step, we're going to engage with the ministry to fine-tune that, because I'm sure they will have their own perspectives, their own emphasis to add to this. And once this is agreed, we'll go through a process of actually starting the analysis. When the analysis is completed and a first draft is available, a really key process is to do with opening up the draft, which has been prepared by the ministry in the first instance, plus various other contributors, to a set of technical discussions. So we're now talking about the possibility of setting up a poverty reduction council, which would take the lead in looking at different dimensions of poverty and also contributing to the strategy in a technical sense. Of course, it's not just the ministry and experts that have a role in strategies. If you look at good practice, international good practice, there comes a point when the drafts have to be distributed more widely to the various stakeholders out there. In the case of poverty reduction, there's a huge number of them, not least NGOs and many other players that are interested in contributing to the topic of poverty reduction. So we would hope to engage with the government to open up the draft at a point when it's ready to a wider consultation process. And that will lead ultimately to feedback, which will be incorporated and fine-tuned and incorporated into the final draft. Okay, that's the process of creating a strategy. And we hope this will be done in the next few months. The issue then becomes one of implementation. And again, this is something that we're engaging with the government and trying to highlight some good practices in this respect, because if you look at international experience, it's all very well creating a strategy. The issue is ultimately about how effective will the implementation be. And I've worked with a multitude of countries across the world, and I've helped them create strategies. I've evaluated them. I've helped governments to implement them as well. And what's clear is that, and it's not just my experience, the standard good practice is that there have to be within the strategy certain elements built into them. These are some of the things we're engaging with the government on to ensure that they're implemented. Of course, there has to be a way of checking whether the strategy is being effective or not. One way to do that is typically to identify certain targets or key performance indicators, whatever you want to call them, in order to say, well, okay, today in 2020, this is the current level of poverty or different dimensions of poverty. And then, of course, if it's going to be a 10-year strategy, you'd want to have the targets that are supposed to be achieved. So then you can check 10 years later where the strategy has actually been achieved or not at a fairly, let's say, global level or according to certain strategic objectives. Which is all well and good, but actually the strategies have to be embedded in something. There has to be traction within them. And that means that very often you have to create an action plan connected to that strategy, which unpacks the kind of global and regional and so on objectives and identify specific measures to be implemented by specific organization by a certain deadline and with certain key performance indicators connected with those. So we're talking about the establishment of an action plan to be connected with a strategy. And of course, there has to be some mechanisms to ensure implementation, that this is effective, and if there are problems, you can counteract them. So that means introducing element within the strategy, not just around the poverty analysis measures and so on, but also about the monitoring, evaluation and reporting side of things. So in the draft that we've proposed to the ministry, that also includes a process of using what I previously mentioned, the council, but possibly other tools as well, to regularly report, check on progress and report on progress. And because poverty reduction is cross-cutting across so many ministries, agencies, and so on, then obviously that requires some element of intergovernmental coordination and engaging with these various players if certain parts of the strategy and action plan are not being implemented, or there are blockages in the system or whatever. So you can actually look at that and try to identify what is stopping the progress and what could be done by a particular institution to overcome that. So I've just set out broadly a certain process connected with the development of the strategy, the approval of the strategy, obviously led by the ministry and ultimately approved by the government, and the process after the strategy in terms of monitoring, evaluation, reporting to make sure it remains on track. So I hope that was useful. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Ricardo, rahmat. Bizda vaqtimiz biroz kam qolayotgani uchun bevosita mana shu savol javoblarga o'tamiz. Birinchi savol, menimcha bu ko'proq Willga beriladigan savol. Mana shu Jahon bankining bergan ma'lumotlarga qaraganda bu yerda aytilyaptiki, o'sha avgust oyiga kelib pandemiya davrida 900 mingga ko'paygan o'sha qashshoqlikda yashayotgan O'zbekistonning fuqarolari. Vilga savol shundan iboratki, mana shu 900 mingta odamni deylik 1 yil ichida mana shu qashshoqlik darajasidan olib chiqib ketish uchun 3 ta eng muhim qilinadigan narsa nimadan iborat yoki qaysi sektorlarni hukumat bevosita mana shu 1 yil ichida rivojlantirish kerak? Bu birinchi savol. Marhamat, Will.
Thank you very much for this question. So I think it's very possible. There are a lot of unknowns, so it's not a given. But one thing that's been very encouraging to see is that as the lockdown measures have been relaxed, and as the safety of the population permits, when people are going back to work, it's become clear that most of the people who stopped working did not do so permanently. So it was not that they are not going back to work ever. It's that there was in most cases a temporary disruption, and so that means that we would hope anyway that this would suggest that the recovery is going to be quite quick. That we would hope that this quick bounce back that we saw when the lockdown measures were relaxed would continue, as the situation improves. This is, of course, requires that the pandemic be under control, and all countries in the world, I think, are struggling with this. That when the pandemic sort of resurges, it disrupts normal life, and it's very difficult to have a full labor market recovery without getting it under control. So, of course, a vaccine is the thing that we're all sort of waiting and hoping for, and in the interim there are things that can mitigate this, but there's a sort of a key first step, which is that it needs to be safe for people to go back to work. Thereafter, many countries have adopted a couple of different strategies. So one thing to bear in mind is that it's not everybody has been impacted in the same way. And in particular, people working in particular areas or people who are reliant on particular sources of income have been harmed much more. So in particular, those who are working in the services sector had a much larger disruption than those who didn't. So those working in restaurants, anything associated with tourism, this can be something as large as airline companies, and can be as small as a neighborhood restaurant or a cafe. And in these situations, those are the areas where the job disruptions have been largest. And so, having a strategy to help people during the peak of the crisis so that their incomes do not fall below a minimum amount of well-being is very important. And the government has introduced several, expansions of social assistance and other sorts of protection measures to try to support those people who have been affected. And a lot of the people who have been affected most strongly were associated with these sorts of sectors that were just very vulnerable to the crisis and to job losses there. The situation changes, though, when the situation becomes safer. So when the situation becomes safe for more people to be working, when more jobs are safe for people to do, then there are a couple of things that are becoming more common internationally. Probably the most common is public investment, so increased public investment. And the idea here is to try to identify these sort of no regrets kinds of investments. And human capital, investing in human capital is a really good example of this, where it's very unlikely that we will regret having put more money into education. It's very unlikely that we would regret putting more money into healthcare for people. These are the sorts of things that, expanding to trying to take care of people in the immediate aftermath, but also try to take up for some of the loss in demand that has occurred because of the crisis, could increase the growth at a time where it's really needed. A few other examples are areas like increasing energy efficiency and the greenness of energy production. It's very labor-hungry sort of activity that requires a lot of work to be done. And so when there are these cases, when there are these issues where there's something that is already a priority that is going to need to be done in the future anyway, accelerating that and moving it forward can also help to address some of this lack of jobs that are available. I mean, there are a lot of examples like this, and I know that the government has put a lot of thinking into these sorts of programs. So maybe I'll just sort of end with one other sort of example of how countries are trying to address the labor market recovery, which is what are called wage subsidies. And this is being used in some countries already in Central Asia and elsewhere in the region. But the idea is basically to identify those sectors that have been most affected and to try to make it easier for people to be hired in them. One challenge that businesses have is that they've lost a lot of income. And in that situation, they're very reluctant to try to hire new people. Because paying salaries is often one of the largest costs of smaller businesses, in particular in the private sector. And so one thing that some countries have done are to try to offset some of the cost of hiring that one or two people in smaller businesses through these wage subsidies. And when, some of these programs already exist in Uzbekistan that were used even before the crisis. And so an expansion of these types of programs is something that many countries are doing to try to target to particular people, so lower income people with lower wage jobs, and sectors that have been particularly hard hit, like services, like these sort of smaller businesses that maybe don't have as much access to credit or to the other sources of resilience that maybe larger companies already have. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you very much. Boshqa yoshlarimizdan savol bo'lsa, yana iltimos qilamiz. Biroz vaqtimiz tig'izligi uchun iltimos ayniqsa viloyatlardan bizga qo'shilgan yoshlarimizdan savollar kutib qolamiz. Marhamat. Qo'limizni ko'taramiz. Kimda bu yerda qo'l ko'tarish funksiyasi bor. Menda hozir bu yerda yana 5 ta savol bor. Marhamat, kim gapirmoqchi? Faolroq bo'lamiz, iltimos. Bu yerda ingliz tilida savol keldi chatga. Men o'qib beraman. I think there is a question to Will. How Uzbek education and healthcare should transform in times of pandemic in order to let youth to fully use its human development potential. I'm asking this since World Bank is predicting that just 50 to 63% of young people could use the benefits of human development. Will, if you can please briefly, 2 minutes.
Thank you. I'll try to be brief. I'm not sure I heard the entire question, but yes, I mean, this is one of the clearest impacts has been, in education and healthcare. And I think, it's to Uzbekistan's credit that it has a quite strong foundation that it's building from in basic education and basic healthcare. So it has a very strong foundation that's really being tested during this time. In a way that other countries have really struggled. I think Uzbekistan has been resilient with respect to education and healthcare more so than many places. But the costs here are large, and the expectations that I've seen, in the analysis of colleagues who specialize in this area is that it's going to take years to recover, from the loss of the time in school and of course, for those people who have been ill and been sick, I mean, the costs of them are extremely concentrated and very difficult to weather. So I think that this is an area where there's a lot that can be done, building on an already strong foundation in Uzbekistan. There are investments in sort of the quality of education that could be made. I think in particular an opportunity that Uzbekistan has is a larger investment in tertiary education and the accessibility of tertiary education. So Uzbekistan is a bit below countries of its income level in terms of the access to tertiary education, especially for people living in rural and remote areas. And this is an area where, again, it's a long-term investment in Uzbekistan's future to be encouraging opportunities for people in this way. And so this is an area where I think that, looking into more investments in this area is probably something that we wouldn't regret.
Thanks a lot. Katta rahmat. Bu yerda ikkita savol tushdi. Birinchisi janob Markoga, ikkinchisi janob xonim Matilda Dimovskaga tushdi. Men o'qib beraman. Agar Matilda va Marko 1 minutdan shu savollarga javob bersangiz, chunki savollar kelmoqda, nimagadir yoshlarimiz qo'llarini ko'tarmayapti, lekin menga yozishmoqda. Men ulgurmayapman savollarni o'qishga ham. Birinchi savol Marko janoblari, sizga Jahon banki bevosita mana shu yoshlarni pandemiya davrida ancha qiynalib qolgan yoshlarga biron bir grant yoki moliyaviy ko'mak beradimi yoki yo'qmi? Deylik, mana shu bevosita o'zini biznesini ochish uchun. Ikkinchi savol Matilda Dimovskaga. Qoraqalpog'istonda, aynan Mo'ynoq rayonida biz istiqomat qilamiz. Mo'ynoq yoshlaridan berilgan savol. Keyingi masalan kunlarda yoki keyingi masalan oylarda BMT taraqqiyot dasturi bevosita mana shu o'zini faoliyatini yana kengaytirishni rejalashtirganmi yoki yo'qmi? Savol tushdi. Marhamat, 1 minutda agar iloji bo'lsa. Marko.
Yeah, thank you for the question, and I do recognize that young people are struggling, as Will and another speaker have illustrated. In relation to the assistance we can provide, normally it's an assistance that is channeled through programs and projects. Some of these projects may have to do, when directed to young people, to strengthening training and capacity, building skills. In other cases, for example, entrepreneurship skills. In other cases, they may have to do with targeting job creation to facilitate access to younger people, etc. Some of these programs may indeed have grant opportunities to access these services. But normally they are part of a broader scheme of activities of support that we implement in any given country. So I cannot answer that we have grants to assist individual youth directly from the World Bank to youth, but we definitely have programs that are trying to address challenges faced by youth more broadly. Some of these programs may include also grant financing for beneficiary, for youth beneficiary. Thanks.
Rahmat Marko. Keyingi savol Matildaga. O'sha bu ta'kidlab o'tgandek, Qoraqalpog'iston Respublikasi Mo'ynoqda BMT taraqqiyot dasturi tomonidan yoshlarni qo'llab-quvvatlash bo'yicha biron bir dasturlar ishlab chiqarilmoqdami? Yaqin kunlarda amalga oshiriladigan. Matilda.
Greetings to Mo'ynoq. Mo'ynoq is very close to UNDP and to my heart personally. I was there like a year ago, and I long for the time when I will be there again. You know, the short answer is yes, of course, goes without saying. We have been there for 20+ years, and we intend to be there. The question is how. I think one lesson that we have learned over the period is that doing the same approach years over years brings us the same result. So what we want to, we believe is important, is to step up our support, to stand behind the initiative of the President of Uzbekistan and transform the RLC into a zone of innovation and new technologies. So we are working now of trying to solicit ideas also from many, including the young people, and that's great that you are asking this question. What are the ways to accelerate some of the on some of the fronts? We understand that there are many ways, there are many investments, But the issue is how to make the more systematic and coordinated push, issue on which we are working. We will be very soon presenting our specific plans, and there are so many examples on which we will be building. Yesterday I was tweeting about Nazifa Opa, a women-led cooperative in a village around Muinak, when they were taking care about their lives, producing the food, etc. But they are doing it in a so responsible manner, doing new technologies and trying to save the pastures around them. So I think there, Muinak already has a lot of examples, a lot of potential, and particularly with the young people. We will be, of course, continuing and counting on your support for that. Thank you. Thank you for the question. And I look forward meeting you there.
Rahmat Matilda. Marko, sizga yana bitta juda ham og'ir savol tushdi. Bu yerda iltimos qilishdi. Juda ham og'ir savol, qiziqarli savol. Siz italiyaliksiz, italyanlar juda ham futbolni ashaddiy muxlislari. Sizning sevimli jamoangiz qaysi jamoa?
Okay, I appreciate that. I don't know if I will get in trouble, but AC Milan. It's the team the first team that I was able to see when I was a young boy live, and I stuck to it. It did better in the past, but recently it's not doing so well. But thank you for that question.
Bu savolning ikkinchi savoli ham bo'ldi. Nimaga bu savol berildi? Yaqinda bilasiz, o'zbekistonlik hujumchi Eldor Shomurodov o'sha Italiyaning Genoa jamoasiga A seriyada ishtirok etgan jamoaga qo'shildi va menimcha o'sha o'zbek futbol fanatlari ham bu yerda ham bor ekan. O'shaning uchun shu savol berishdi. Rahmat. Keyingi savolga o'tamiz. Menimcha bu ko'proq yoki videoga beriladigan savol, qisqacha 1 minut agar unaqa bo'lsa, mana shu bevosita pandemiyadan aziyat chekkan, eng ko'p aziyat chekkan qaysi viloyatlar, shu Jahon bankining statistikasida yoki tadqiqotlarida ko'rsatilganmi o'sha viloyatlar, qaysi viloyatlar eng ko'proq pandemiya davrida aziyat chekishgan? Will?
Thank you so much for this question. Yeah, so it depends a little bit on what types of harm we're looking at. So you know, in one sense, the you know, loss of income is concentrated in particular areas. There are some areas where the health impacts have been larger, and so there's a lot of different ways that you know, this is affected people in different situations. So to try to answer this, we have a report or some analysis that we did together with government counterparts, where we looked at local statistics from the Mahalla officials in each of the Mahallas in the country. There's, you know, all of you know, I'm sure that there is more than 9,000 of them. And what we tried to do is to look at the sources of risk and resilience. So we know that, you know, communities that have a lot of people who are older are at higher risk for more severe complications from the disease, and therefore, you know, there are more risks associated with those places than in others. And in some places, we can see, you know, that there's more sources of resilience. You know, there are you know, there's more public infrastructure. There's more things available to help people weather the crisis. But if I were to say, you know, focus on a couple of specific things. So on the employment impacts, what we've seen is that in the very core of cities, there's some resilience coming from the types of jobs that people are doing. So you know, in the very core of Tashkent, there's a lot of people who are able to work from home or work in a way that they didn't lose their income entirely. Whereas in densely populated areas that are outside of the core of cities, so you know, some secondary cities and some areas in the periphery of denser cities, where people you know, who are working in the services sector or working in you know, other types of activities like this had more severe disruptions. people living in very rural areas, you know, so in some senses, we didn't know this until we did the analysis, but or saw what's been happening. But you know, in very rural areas, a lot of the types of jobs that people have and a lot of the activities that people have are pretty safe. You know, the types of disruptions that we've seen in more densely populated areas have been less severe. So in terms of regions, you know, we can share this report with everybody here, and they can sort of look at the specifics. But I would even go further down. I would look even, you know, at the specific mahalas and at the specific districts that have higher risk factors, and those are the places where I would focus on recovery efforts. Thank you.
Buyur, rahmat. Bahrom Rajabov qo'lni ko'tardi. Bahrom, iltimos agar o'zingizni tanishtirib o'tsangiz va savolingizni bersangiz. Marhamat, kamerani yoqasiz agar iloji bo'lsa, Bahrom. Bahrom.
Sorry. Hello. I think I have some technical issues on switching on the camera, but I apologize for that. I have a very brief question. Thank you for having me, and thank you for all speakers to talk about different areas on poverty reduction in Uzbekistan. My question would be very brief. I would probably ask for a brief comment on the plans of the Ministry of Finance of Uzbekistan to eradicate the informal economy in Uzbekistan, which is 48% now. And I think it's kind of also related to the poverty eradication issues in Uzbekistan in the long term. I'm pretty sure the experts from the World Bank and the UNDP have seen these plans already. The only thing is that, you know, that during the pandemic economics time, the main problem was with consumption and distribution, which was the problem. And of course, it was unequally, had an unequal impact on the businesses and the economy. Everything was said already during this meeting. But do you think now these measures on kind of combating this informal economy would make sense when the business does not really has the incentive to become kind of more formal in a way, just because they have already problems due to the pandemic and they already have negative impacts on the economy? So what do you think, how this will work together now, and in short and in long term? Thank you.
Rahmat, keyingi savollarni eshitib ko'ring agar iloji bo'lsa. Biz chunki vaqtdan biroz tig'iz vaqt. Sayyora O'razboyeva keyin spikerlarga beramiz javob berish imkoniyati. Sayyora, eshityapsizmi? O'zingizni tanishtirib o'ting, qayerdansiz, nima bilan shug'ullanasiz?
Men Sayyora O'razboyeva, o'zim magistratura talabasiman. Savolim Matilda Dimovska xonimga. What lessons you learned as a leader during the pandemic period? And we know that you did a lot of projects during COVID-19. So I want to know leadership hints that you learned during your leadership in this hard time.
Marhamat, Matilda, keyin Bahrom savoliga o'tamiz.
Thank you. Thank you. It was a rather challenging period, definitely. Period when we had to fast act, and for that we need to fast understand. So, you know, one of the things that we learned is, in fact, how strong we are and how resilient we can be. I was rather worried at the beginning. I remember it was mid of March when I started. I was stuck home, and then I realized, I mean, I need a huge. We need a huge. We have a huge task to avail the best of us to the country while we are from home. And then, you know, the main insight and the way how we did it is to rely on our team. So to rely on our partners. I think that was for me the main insight, how strong the team that we have is, and then the work that we have with the partners. Everyone was fully responsive. No one bothered or made a difference between day and night. we all worked very hard, starting from our partners. We thought at the beginning it will not be possible. Alisher was talking about the digitalization. We thought it will not be possible. No, it was possible. In particular, our partners were asking for that. So I think that was kind of the leadership insight. The team and the partners that we have are the strong insight, the strongest asset that we have. Thank you.
Rahmat. Birinchi Bahrom bergan savolga kim javob beradi? Jahon bankidan hamkasblarimiz.
I have maybe a couple of thoughts. I'm sure others also, have some insights on this. But I think that the pandemic has really underscored, that government is also an important source of resilience during these types of difficulties. And one of the challenges in around the world has been for those who are not working in formal sectors or businesses that are informal. For the types of support that the governments have been providing to try to weather the crisis are very difficult to transfer to people who are informal, in their activities. So if this, wasn't a formal activity previously, then, bringing it in, into formality in a very short period of time, such that it can receive the sort of, the insurance that government support can provide during a crisis is very difficult to administer. So I think that the crisis has really underscored why, a large informal sector is challenging to sort of maintain well-being. I think, the person who asked the question sort of pointed to, the lack of incentives. And I think that, at least my understanding of the discussion up until now has been precisely that, encouraging the formality is very much around incentives, right? And that, by making it easier to be formal and making sure that the incentives to be formal are aligned, I think that it's a win-win for both businesses, for workers, and for the government and its responsibilities and administration of the activities that are ongoing. So I think that that there are some knotty questions about how to resolve this, and even in advanced countries there's a very large informal sector, a share of the population not paying taxes, and I think it's always a very big challenge to resolve that entirely. But I'm confident that that some progress can be made in this area, some very significant progress can be made in this area that would be good for everybody involved.
Rahmat. Well, bizning vaqtimiz afsuski o'z nihoyasiga yetib qoldi. Agar ishtirokchilardan iltimos qilsam, Matilda, Marko, Will va Ricardo 1 minutdan mana shu bu yerda o'tirgan yoshlarimizga bir nima deydi, bir jumla bilan, masalan, sizni tilaklaringiz yoki mana shu og'ir davrda qaysi so'zlar bilan da'vat berib, ularga bir nima deydi, ruhlantirishingiz mumkin. Matilda.
Yes, I see that, inspiring message. I don't know how inspiring, but I think I was very inspired with what Alisher was saying. I think this invest in yourselves and in the human capital is extremely important, and the lifelong learning. There is nothing, concept of stop learning does not exist. So one needs to invest in oneself. So I think that's my key message. It was discussed largely, and the young people are the most interesting. And the second is go beyond yourself. I think broader, think to the communities, think to your country, where it is and how you can contribute. The mere fact that you are attending this and you are asking this question confirms that you do that. So that's, I got inspiration, in fact. Thank you.
Marco?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I would say 2 points. 2 messages. One is that we talk about poverty, but I don't want young people to leave with the idea that a remote concept down there, you know, the poor and everybody else. I think one message would be it's everybody's business, and everybody is better off if we eliminate poverty, even if you are not among the poor. That's the first message. The second is that every time we talk about poverty, I want to live with a message of optimism, as I said at the beginning. Yes, there is a crisis, but there are opportunities. And we need to take these opportunities for a better future, particularly for our youth. So thank you.
Rahmat, Will?
I wanted to echo Matilda's statement that, you know, I'm inspired by, you know, my experience with the youth and with society in Uzbekistan. It leaves me very confident that, you know, it has a very bright future. And, you know, I think that Uzbekistan has everything that it needs to one, recover from this. I think, you know, everything is there to do that. And what's more, I think, you know, going far beyond that is a very realistic ambition for Uzbekistan. So I'm very excited to see Uzbekistan's future going forward.
Ricardo, marhamat, so'z sizga agar.
Now I can switch. I couldn't switch on my mic for some reason. I had to be let in. Inspiring message, not so easy to do, but I'll do my best. First of all, thank you for the opportunity of contributing to this discussion. Thank you to everybody for coming along and listening to us. The message is simple. Poverty reduction is not an abstract thing. It's not about statistics, not about surveys, not about definitions, not about any of those things. Ultimately, it's about people and people getting involved and contributing, maximizing their potential. And of course, this connects up with what was mentioned earlier about education and grabbing this. This is the opportunity first and foremost. Anybody in any setting can, even in the most deprived of circumstances, education is clearly the route first and foremost. And that comes down to you as an individual, maximizing the assets you have. And those assets are here. And it's about having the determination, willingness to do your best. Of course, there are constraints as well, but ultimately you are in charge of yourselves and your education, and removing as many parts as you can by trying to build up here first and foremost, and then anything is possible in this world. That's the only message I have.
Ricardo, rahmat. Alisher Sadullayev, agar biz bilan bo'lsangiz, sizdan ham bir eshitib qolardik agar. Alisher Sadullayev, menimcha. Yordamlar, Alisher. Yo'q, menimcha Alisher uchrashuvni tark etdilar. Barchaga rahmat deymiz. Mana shu muloqotlarimiz boshida taklif o'tganimizdek yana ham davom etadi. O'ylaymanki, barcha bu yerda o'tirganlar mana shu yoshlardan bir qanaqadir energiya, bir samimiylikni oldik. Shuning uchun Marko, William, Ricardo, Matilda, sizlarga barchangizga rahmat deymiz va o'ylaymanki, yaqin kunlarda uchrashib qolamiz. Mana shu ijobiy nuqtada yana bir bor o'zimizni nima deydik, o'sha tabassumimizni bir-birimizga ulashaylik, qo'llarimizni qilib, rahmat hammaga. Juda bir muloqotli, mazmunli muloqot bo'ldi. Uchrashguncha barchaga xayr, xayrli kun.
Bye bye.
Bye.